you can't contribute if you don't lean in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing worse than a bunch of people sitting around that aren't engaging in a discussion. You wonder,
Right.
why are they even there?
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. Really appreciate all of you who have subscribed to the channel. We're continuing to grow our subscribership, and it's thanks to all of you for passing the word along and to sharing this the podcast and the content. And please continue to hit the like button and share this content. And for those of you who may be new to the channel, obviously, if you like the channel, please subscribe to it. And also thanks to all of you who have been supporting my writing efforts. My last book, Omega Deception, came out a couple of months ago, and it became an Amazon bestseller in 2 categories. So I really appreciate all of your support. But as you know, I have to do this, right, for all of you, if you're podcasters, but I want to get that out of the way and get on to the main event here. So our guest today is somebody very special to Janice and to me, even though we've only known each other for just a few months. We were on a cruise over the holidays, as a lot of you know, and we happened to meet our guest, Suzanne Vautrinot, Major General, Air Force retired, and her husband, Bill, as well as their Zan, we call her Zan, her sister Frosty, and her husband Lance. And we just hit it off. And once we met, we decided to, kind of hang out. And once I found out about Suzanne's background in the Air Force as well as private industry, I knew I had to get her on this podcast because it's a podcast about leadership, but it's also a podcast about people's business journeys and the things that they've had to overcome. And so, Suzanne, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, Mike, I'm already a fan, mostly of Janice, but also of you. It just absolutely impressive in every way. So it's a privilege. It was a lot of fun for several weeks, and I'm so glad that we've continued the relationship and are going to strengthen it even more. So looking forward to it and looking forward to today.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And you're not the first one that has said that I'm okay, but Janice is better. I kind of agree with that. So
just means you have good judgment, good taste, and are obviously compelling because we all say yes to you.
Yeah, well, I was a spy, remember? So, all right. So I want to kind of start at the very beginning of your life, because that's how I like to start, because the origin, like in the movies, the origin story, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the Air Force and why you decided to go into military service?
Sure. So born in Évreux, France. My father was military, and that he was stationed there before de Gaulle threw us all out and decided NATO wasn't very important. So long in the Wayback Machine, 5 kids. We like to say 5 in 5 years, no twins. Hence
Wow.
the Zan, Suzanne, and they were all the same age and couldn't say S's. So became Zan. Lived all over the country. And finally, my dad retired so that we could all start and finish in the same high school and get good enough grades to get scholarships to college. And he always laughed that he had to get out and make enough money to send us to college. So it happened to be Beach, California, which at the time, this was in the mid-late 70s, and not exactly a hotbed of military support. In my junior year, the academies, all of them, opened to women. And at Edison High School in Huntington Beach, it wasn't about whether you were going to college, it was where you were going to college. It was a huge push of the academics and the counselors and the parents. And so if you did anything in writing, if you were going to do a comparison contrast paper, research paper, anything you were going to do, the subject was going to be colleges. And I got really interested in the opening of the academies and the opportunities there, and applied to the Air Force Academy and was nominated and then accepted. Strangely, counselors at Edison High School would come to me and say, but Zan, you have options, because no one had been to any of the academies. And as I said, military wasn't one of the strong pushes. And they were right. I had a number of other full boat scholarships and was very fortunate. And I chose the Air Force Academy. And I truly believe to this day, when you choose, it makes a difference. You can get through anything because it's your decision to be there.
Right.
So fast forward, I arrived, and on your first day, for those that are have ever been through a military academy, you have to be completely retooled and re-socialized. And that begins with announcing that you're going to stand at attention, and we're going to tell you you now have 5 responses. They are yes, sir, no, sir, sir may ask a question, sir may make a statement, and most importantly, no excuse, sir.
Right.
And those are your 5 responses, and you left turn, parch, and you march up the ramp of the United States Air Force Academy, which, if you've ever seen the pictures of the chapel and the ramp leading up and the mountains behind, it is truly inspiring. So as I look up at the ramp and I start to march in with my my new classmates, there are 8-foot aluminum letters, and they read, "Bring me men."
Oh, interesting.
I thought hard for a moment, but they march you up the ramp and into that absolutely spectacularly wonderful chapel. It's an architectural marvel, and in the chapel, the choir is singing a song by Walter Sanfoss, and it is "Bring me men, bring me men to match my mountains, bring me men to match my those with empires in their future and new era in their brains." And I realized that that was about me, that "bring me men" was me, and men is gender neutral. And it changed my whole perspective. And so now I'm at the Air Force Academy, and was fortunate to make it all the way through and graduate. First assignment to a little known place in Los Angeles, California, just a little bit away from the airport. And it was called Secretary of the Air Force Special Projects, which, you know, from your spycraft means absolutely freaking nothing.
Right.
An obfuscation of the National Reconnaissance Office. And we couldn't even say the letters NRO at the time.
Okay. Right.
And NRO was spy satellites, national security assets, spy satellites. The military wasn't even involved at the time. They couldn't even use the data. This was before the time. So this was all satellites and stuff for national security. These are the ones that the film birds could read a license plate from space. And the signals intelligence and the communications intelligence could listen to all the phone calls. The technology was just astonishing. And I'm this baby second lieutenant.
All right. First assignment.
Yep. First assignment. Baby second lieutenant. For anybody not familiar with the military, we wear these little bars that look like butter. So they call you butter bars. And the butter bar is indication that you know absolutely nothing and are infinitely trainable. So I'm brought into this organization, and I am the youngest person in this organization by many years. I was kind of one of those experimental things. We could try to bring in a young person and see if we can train them.
Right.
I was young enough that my first day, they gave me an office, which astonishing for a butter bar. Butter bars don't get offices. But I have an office, and I walk into my office, and it is completely covered in newspapers because lieutenants, like puppies, aren't trained. So
I love that.
First part of my training, matter of fact, my very first boss, CC Albert, she and I, the two of us together, made up 100% of the women in this organization. CC Albert was a major going to lieutenant colonel, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you understand the difference between personal and professional criticism? Because you're going to get a lot of the latter." Just a great lesson also that sticks with me. And everyone in that organization spent the next few years training me, you know, in part so I wouldn't screw up, but also because it was so important to them that I understood and can contribute. And I fell in love with it, fell in love with the Air Force, fell in love with space and technology and the intelligence community and what we were able to do as a nation. And, you know, people say they bleed blue or they bleed red, white, and blue. That was my introduction, and what a great one. So fast forward a lot of years and a lot of different assignments, and we could talk about them, but the whole first part of my career was in space, because at the same time I was at the NRO and not able to talk about it, we created US Space Command and Air Force Space Command, all the stuff that's now the Space Force. And so it became a career. It even got its own career field, which astonishing to me because at the time there was no space career field. So got to do that. it was fascinating. Fast forward a bunch more years and some more assignments. And because I ran all of the satellites, I ran the 50th Space Wing, which is I'm here in Colorado. It's out east, Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado, flies nations as well as some of the other nations' satellites, hundreds of them. And it also has the network that talks to all the satellites, because you have to be line of sight, nothing between you and the satellite from the ground, which means you put stations all over the world. We had over 40 of them to be able to talk to the satellites. So the network that talked to all the satellites and all the satellite operations were in my bailiwick of responsibility, all of my folks doing that. And if you understood satellites, you understood networks in space. I mean, that's effectively what they were. And the ground network that controlled all the satellites, that was worldwide, had all the approvals to operate in every part of the globe, the protocols. Those protocols were the baseline for what later became the internet. So obviously you understand networks, you understand phone systems, you understand internet. So I was brought across to do network warfare. We called it network warfare in the early days of cyber, because offensive is offensive. And so I ran network warfare, which was offensive cyber. And then we had a crisis that we can talk about or not in the mid 2000s, the thumb drive debacle. Never waste a good crisis. And General Alexander and the Secretary of Defense and the chairman didn't. And we merged offense and defense and created U.S. Cyber Command, and went on to help start up Cyber Command and run the plans and policy and requirements and money and a lot of that stuff. And then went on to run the Air Force offense, defense, exploitation, and IT, at the time under 24th Air Force, but now 16th Air Force, which that means nothing in terms of organizations. It has no airplanes, but it is all cyber stuff in the United States Air Force, both the missions that are done for the combatant command, U.S. Cyber Command, as well as the organize and train and equip for the Air Force. And following that, I had just a tremendous opportunity when I retired from the Air Force to join my first board of directors, which happened to be Symantec. Before we sold all the technology to Broadcom, Symantec was a cybersecurity company, and then was invited to join several other boards of directors. So I'm fortunate to have boards that I now serve that are in about every industry. So Wells Fargo, CSX, the railroad, Ecolab, which is chemicals as well as life sciences and water and everything. And then Parsons, which is about half construction design engineering, the other half defense and intelligence. And then my nonprofit, or my private board, is Battelle Memorial Institute, which runs most of the national laboratories. So I still get to hold the clearances and see all the coolest technology in the world. And when I grow up, I want to be me. It's just
wow. Now that's quite a career that's still ongoing. So kudos to you. There's a lot to unpack here, but thanks for the overview.
It was a long overview, but I think it's everything.
No. I mean, I'm glad you did that, because it gives everyone a sort of the context, right? Just sort of like where you started and where you were. So I'm going all the way back to high school now. So you find out that the academies are opening up to women. And I think you've answered this question already, in that the counselors were kind of saying, well, you have other opportunities. So you really self-directed yourself to the academy versus, a counselor saying, hey, maybe you should try this, correct?
Yeah, that's true. The more you research, the more you find things that kind of light you up in the morning, that you say that would be really interesting. And the reason I applied to the Air Force Academy and not West Point or Annapolis, those lesser academies.
There you go.
For anyone listening
Air
to
Force
services, it's sibling rivalry.
I know.
The Air Force opened almost all of its careers to women at the same time they opened the academy. Now, certainly, women couldn't serve in combat, so none of the combat operations, but almost everything else was open to women. And so you looked at the range of things you could do, and you could do them at a leadership level very early in your career, was the other thing that I found. So it wasn't my intention to have a full career. I served over 30 years. That wasn't my intention. My intention was to go to the academy, have this great early opportunity for training, learning, leadership, and then I had an idea of what I was going to do next. And like I said, once I got to special projects, it was just, why would I want to do anything else? And that was reinforced every time I got a chance to do something new and unusual that hadn't been created yet. And I got to be
right. Do you remember? I'm sure you do. What that other option was going to be for you, which if your original plan was to stay in for a little bit in the military and then get out, what were you planning on doing?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with State Department at the time had all kinds of folks that were advisory, and you would go and you would be the equivalent in the military would be a legislative liaison, but you would do all of the advisory work, and it was PhD level and a deep understanding. And when I looked at those career fields, you had to have had about 10 years of experience, and you had to have the higher education, and you had to have experience internationally and as a strategy professional, not so much in politics, but in what goes on internationally and how to advise on economic as well as other areas. And I truly thought that I would do something like that. Matter of fact, I thought I'd go into the intelligence side because it seemed a more direct path.
Okay,
of course, that's not what I did. That's
right.
I was brought into a very unusual process because they never took folks out of the academy as a what's called a by name request. I was a by name request, so I was incredibly fortunate and had folks that were really helping me to move across to that, who frankly knew better than I did about what would be a great opportunity.
Yeah. What branch of the military was your father in?
He was also Air Force.
Air Force. Okay.
Yeah. But
did he encourage you? But did that
make a difference as you thought?
Okay. Yeah.
I am the only one that has anything to do with the military.
Is that right?
And there was probably no one that tried harder to talk me out of the Air Force Academy than my father.
Interesting.
No one was more supportive once I was in, but no one was more vocal about how there would be other things I could go do prior to actually going in.
Right. Okay. So you get to the academy and you see the signs, right? You know, for men and you told me your reaction to it. Was there any point in that first couple of months as you're going through your initial training that you thought, oh no, I don't know what I got myself into, or did it feel right?
Gosh, right and wrong. I'm not sure. You know, when you're that young and you don't know anything else,
right?
You're just kind of in the power through mode. So all of my thoughts were about, how do I accomplish this? How do I get through this? How do I overcome whatever hurdle I was having? And at first, you know, that would be the physical things and all the training and everything else. And then of course the academics. It was really more of a power through. How do I get through this, as opposed to wanting to ever do something, if that makes sense?
Yep, it does.
There were days you go out on the terrazzo, you know, that raised area where all of the buildings and everything are, and you look at the mountains and you take a deep breath and say, okay, I can do this.
Right.
So it's not that you didn't have to push your way through, but it wasn't because you wanted to do something else.
Let me pause this for a second. Here we go. All right. And we'll edit this out, so it'll be fine. You
can edit out all of my too long conversations or break it up. I'll try to stop between more often.
Yeah, no, this is fine. So we'll just get back into it. So, obviously very challenging in the Air Force Academy. Is there well, first of all, how many other women were in your class?
So when we first entered, there were, I think, just shy of 160. There was a requirement that you could have no more than 10%.
Okay.
So I think we had just under 1,600 cadets and under 160 of those women. So just under 10%. We were still under just under 10% when we graduated. So we had, I think, 82 of us that graduated. We had a couple people that graduated just a little later. So I think 80 on graduation day, but about 80.
Okay, good. And during those 4 years, at what point did you feel like you were in your stride? And you know, I mean, is there a certain point where you ever felt comfortable? If that's the proper term.
You know how, I spent a lot of time in space business, so I'll use the celestial. Every once in a while, the planets align.
Right.
It doesn't last for very long, but they align, and
Right.
you feel great, to your point, in your stride. And then it's all,
Right.
out of control again. And
Right.
that they're going to realign again. And so several times throughout that I had hit my stride. I knew I was doing well academically. I knew I was doing well militarily. I had some leadership positions in the cadet wing. I, I was in drum and bugle corps and choirs and other things. So I was very comfortable at the academy from that standpoint, but always challenges. I can remember very beginning of my senior year, believe it or not, I had going into the mid semester where you do the original grades. I had all A's and I was failing one class. It was just the strangest thing. I'm on almost on academic probation, and my grade point is above a 3. So it was just just thing. So you need extra instruction and everything else, and of course pulled it out, and everything was great. And thank God for instructors that only had 20 or 30 students, because they could spend extra time. But there's just some things that are a bigger hurdle than others.
Sure.
And so I remember that, and I remember thinking, how can I be doing so well in all these things and just not get this? And of course, my sisters and brothers are all in other colleges, and they're saying, well, why don't you just, drop the class, take an incomplete, you can take it again next year. And then I'm like they got rocks. You can't do that.
You can't do that, no.
Yeah,
right?
We can't do that. And so you have no choice but to power through it. But you have those all the way through. It's these things along the way. And so it's what's the next hurdle more than it is everything's okay.
No, I agree 100%. So you get to your first assignment, you're the butter bar, right? But obviously, the military, and especially the academies, they teach leadership. You're being trained to be a leader,
and a good follower, frankly.
And a good follower, yes. A good leader is always a good follower and a listener, obviously. But in those formative years, as a young leader, who would you consider to be your mentor or mentors? Anybody that comes to mind that helped you kind of maneuver through this new career that you're in?
That office, because they were all so much senior, they were all like big brothers and parents in a sense. And so each one brought something. I can remember going to meetings, and you have, the contractors are building very highly technology intensive satellites and everything. And I had a couple of, one of them was had graduated from Stanford and just extraordinary engineer. And then another guy, Scott Rounce, Bill Doyle and Scott Rounce. And at any rate, they're at this meeting, and Bill Doyle has these styrofoam coffee cups, little tiny ones, next to him. And as the speakers are talking, he draws a little face on an upside down coffee cup that's a not very happy face. And then he draws a eyes rolling face. And then, so pretty soon he's got this set of like 5 cups. And as these speakers are talking, he's moving one of the cups to the top to show me, but absolutely no indication to the folks that were briefing him what he was thinking.
Interesting.
But he was helping me, and but it was the most subtle thing. And then you would watch he and Scott Rounce play good cop, bad cop about, who asked the question, who is more demanding. And it was a lesson in how do you manage tough technological discussions and get the right information out. And I learned early on, I was the baby lieutenant. I could ask a question, and because I asked the question, they kind of wanted to help poor little me understand. And by the third time you asked a question, they'd tell you the truth. It was fascinating. And so we would create the dynamic in the room of who was going to ask and how you were going to do it. It was a teamwork in the meeting itself, always prepared. And so that lesson and those people, absolutely spectacular. Ralph Jacobson was our general officer that was in charge of the whole organization. Most inclusive person I've ever met. If you were in a meeting with him doing preparation, he asked everyone in the room, not just the most senior people, but
Right.
he wanted people's opinions. Phenomenal. My immediate boss, we used to call him the Tasmanian devil. He would come roaring in a cloud of dust and give all kinds of direction and then go roaring out again. But there was a trust there in the roaring in to give direction that said, okay, now go do all of these things and get all these things done. And you knew he'd be back and it'd be in a cloud of dust, but by God, he trusted you to get all of those things done. And then a guy named Jay Terry, who was my second colonel boss. Matter of fact, he was an Aggie, and our offices, because of all the skiffs and everything else, we were in the basement. I put a sign on the door that says Aggie Penthouse. He had a great sense of humor even then. So he created teams. And so even in that very first enclave of training, every one of them different, but how to think about things, how to research, how to prepare for an engagement, and a meeting is an engagement, as much as a launch or flying the satellites. Every piece was an engagement, and how to go through that were all of those early lessons.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the fact that you learn from, as we all do, different leadership styles, and it's continuous improvement, right? You never stop learning.
Exactly, and you learn that every style works. And much later in life, you have to learn what style works for you. But at the time, you get to see that, no, it's not a model of behavior. It is many, many models, and all of them to be followed. And frankly, all the people that say, look at some leader that's terrible and just don't do that, really bad advice. Not doing something is never positive. Looking at all the things that you can do and want to emulate, and I had a million more through my career, emulating those things that resonate the absolute best. I'm convinced that's what makes you a great leader.
Yeah, I agree. And you were blessed to have these folks in your life in your formative years. But something you said also is interesting, because you talked about how, like, you spoke up, right? You rendered an opinion. And I think for a lot of people, just being able to render that opinion, because I think a lot of people, as they're growing their leadership acumen or trying to, you sit around a table with a bunch of high flyers and you're afraid to say something because you're afraid of looking stupid or saying something stupid. That obviously was not an issue with you. Well, what advice would you give to a lot of people who actually feel that way, right? The imposter syndrome, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're reminding me of something I haven't thought about in years. My nickname was the PDLT, Pushy Damn Lieutenant. PDLT.
I gotta remember that.
And it was said with great fondness, and I reveled in it. What I found is you didn't need airtime, but if you thought deeply about things and studied them and had an idea or an opinion or even a question, that was the entree to being a contributor. You can't contribute if you don't lean in. And there's nothing worse than a bunch of people sitting around that aren't engaging in a discussion. You wonder, why are they even there? And so think of it as, if you're not engaging, either to understand more or to offer an opinion or to get somebody to provide more details so that you can get in G with what they're thinking, then you're not contributing. And you have to ask yourself, why are you there?
Right. Yeah. No, that's 100%. And a lot of people have to just get over the fact that you don't have to have all the answers. You're around a table with a bunch of smart people because obviously there's a strategic question or even a tactical question that needs to be answered, and we don't have the answers. That's why we're here, right?
Exactly. And the best people in the world are sometimes the ones that have the good questions that get a better discussion going. So don't think you need the answers. You need to be thoughtful and have good questions, and you need to try out opinions and thoughts, and other people will come back with more information. It's an engagement. And so you just think of it that way.
And you said something earlier in our conversation about, good leader is a good listener too, right? Because I think a lot of people who are afraid to engage. There's always going to be those folks that, as soon as a question is posed, they've got the answer right away. They're the first ones to speak up. And it's like the loudest voice or the first person doesn't necessarily mean they're the right answer. You may want to listen for a little bit and then render your opinion, right?
Yeah. And as a boss, you have to recognize you've got your extroverts and your introverts. I can
Right.
remember as a wing commander, you do the big exercises where the world is coming to an end.
Right.
I've likened it to remember gravity, where everything goes wrong in space all at once. All of
Right.
these things are probably possible, but can you imagine all of those going wrong at once? Not going to happen. But that's
Right.
the way we exercise. And I can remember doing the hot washes, the out briefs, as we were doing these exercises. And I'm an extrovert. My husband will tell you I'm a flaming extrovert, but the extroverts will talk first about what happened and what they were thinking and what they were going to do differently and all the things you'd expect in a hot wash. And as a leader, I would say, okay, let's take a break. Let's go get some lunch, get another cup of coffee. Let's come back. And when we came back, two things had happened. One, the extroverts had finally shut up, which I know, you got to get it all out because you're engaged. And the introverts were ready to engage because they've been processing, they've been listening. And when they would engage, the room would go silent because people hadn't thought about the things that they were now bringing to the fore, about why they had done certain things and what they had seen during the crisis. And so they created this wonderful way to weave everybody together and, become kind of a like mind, because we were in each other's heads. I think you're a martial arts expert, Dantai, of a like mind, and moving like fish in a stream or like birds when they fly. That's a learned thing. And what I learned is the folks that you let talk later that want to take a while to put everything together in their heads, just brilliant contributors.
Right. Yeah, I love the martial arts analogy too. That's kind of cool. So now you're obviously, we like to say, you start off tactical and then you become a subject matter expert, and the pet phrases, a trusted advisor, trusted leader, all that good stuff. Do you remember or obviously you do, the first assignment where you were actually responsible for formulating strategy as opposed to implementing?
Wow, what a great question. Let me think about this for a second.
Sure. If you think about it, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to let the doggies out. Yeah. Now that they've been punted. Yeah. So as you're going up your career ladder, do you remember the time in your career where you were able to actually implement, not actually able to formulate strategy versus implementing it, right? The first time you were in a position where it was your job to come up with the strategy for the organization. Yeah.
So it's not one great big move. So the first time that I had to create you'd call it a campaign plan. Somebody didn't give me the direction. I had to create how we were going forward on something. And what we were trying to build I think we can talk about it now, continuity of government, and how to integrate the satellite systems into that. And it was my program. And this was about 2-3 years into my time in my first assignment. And so you have to create, how are you going to implement this? Who are going to be the experts that you bring on board? How are you going to do the training? How are you going to get agreement with all the other organizations that are part of this whole of government process? So you have to work through all the pieces without somebody telling you, here's the answer, because it had never been done. So that, on a small scale. Now, fast forward, my second assignment was at U.S. Air Force's Europe, and they were both integrating space, but they were also trying to do all kinds of mission operations. And so I had a bunch of the technology that was the ground communications, MCE TriTac, but it was all the troposcatter radios and all the things you were going to put across the country. And the method for how we were going to do that for all of Europe was one of my programs. And I had all of the folks that were expert from the engineering departments and the manpower departments and everything else, but you're the lead, not because you were the most senior person, but my organization had the lead. And so therefore I was the lead in this, let's call it a task force that was going to do it. So you have to come up with all the pieces, parts, and you have to convince the seniors that this is the right way forward and get their support and the right funding and everything else. So then you get a bigger version of that.
Right.
So fast forward a lot of years, and those kinds of individual programs, you get to so I was at the Pentagon, and I was a Major Lieutenant Colonel Select, And I was in the organization that did the chairman's program assessment, chairman's program recommendations. And the vice chairman had created the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, which was the number twos from every one of the services, plus support from the joint staff. And they would go around, we call them the trips from hell, but we'd go every combatant command and get all of the information about what all the different combatant commands wanted to do. And we had to distill that and decide where the nation was going. And you would think that this would have been, hundreds of people and hundreds of papers. In reality, to writing those documents, there were probably 4 key people. And you're like Hamilton, you're in the room where it happens, because I was both the recorder and the one that briefed all the seniors. So I had all the records of everything that everybody had said. And so as you're distilling it, you're the font of information that's going to go to the decisions. And the 4 people that are in the room get to create what is the future of the nation. And what's the chairman going to do? And just that level of visibility to what everyone thought was important, and to be able to crosswalk that and then turn it into something that was going to move the nation. All of the practice before that led to the ability to contribute there. And now when you go on to other senior assignments, you've been through that process of prioritization and really listening to all of the option space and creating what has to be the strategy and what you're going to have to move forward. And what are the branches and sequels, or the on-ramps and off-ramps in business? If this doesn't work this way, what's your alternatives? And knowing what those are going to be at a level of depth, really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, what a project, right, to work on, right?
Phenomenal. It led. I was chosen to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs junior exec. And it was from that assignment. And I think that the contribution there and the ability to think at a larger scale was probably part of that selection. And then I got to watch him do it, and the chairman and the assistant chairman. And of course they did it in moments, and they did it every moment of the day, but just phenomenal visibility to people that could do it really well after seeing what has to go into it, that it's not just a pro forma exercise. It really does matter, and it's the future.
Right. Yeah. Who was the chairman that you were the exec for? Junior exec?
General Shelly. And my heart broke when we lost him. We lost him on the 3rd stroke. And when he did the first one, he did really well. And we had some long conversations after his 2nd stroke. He could not have been prouder that everything he had done to be healthy and everything else. The thing that was the hardest for him was that people had to help him. And he was such a proud man, but what a great boss. I mean, you talk about somebody that's a mentor. Oh my gosh. Every day was a lesson with General Shelly. He was just phenomenal.
What were the characteristics that you really admired about him?
So let's start with how he listened. He preferred small groups to large groups. And no matter how many generals I tried to explain that to, they always wanted to have an entourage in the room, particularly some services. It used to, and I'd say, if you do it in the small room with just the person that knows the most and you and maybe 1 or 2 others, it's going to go a lot faster and you're going to get a decision. But no, they wanted to have the great big conference room. But General Shelly would listen to every conversation in the room. As a matter of fact, he would sit back in his chair and he would allow them to fill him with information and say what they thought they needed to say. And he had a great tell when he had heard everything and he was ready to render a decision, he would lean forward to the table.
Interesting.
And what was funny is he was ready to give them the decision, and they would start talking again. And he would lean back and he'd let them keep going. And I think part of it was he was letting them come to the conclusions and get through the dialogue in a way that was incredibly gracious, because he had no time. Now, if they ran out of time, they were going to have to reschedule. If they would let him lean forward and give them the decision, he would not only give them a decision, but he would give them the 6 levels of understanding that he had, that they probably were not aware of things that were going on in the world or things that were going on in Congress. And he would provide those additional tidbits that said, this recommendation, perfect sense, let's adjust it this way because of these things. So he would educate them in the same process of making the decision. When he would take calls, even from the SAC year. Who he talked to in what order was fascinating. I knew exactly who to get on the phone. If certain person called, I knew that he wasn't going to talk to them first. And so sir, he's in the morning meeting and I will let him know right away. But you knew that you needed this person and this person on the phone before he ever called that one back, because he wanted the rest of the lay of the land, and you knew who he was going to get it from. So who did he trust? And in what order was he going to take the information so that he could work through it?
Right.
Just amazing. And maybe the last thing is relationships. Because he trusted, he was also trusted. If he picked up the phone and called Madeleine Albright and they had a conversation, it was going to come to a closure. It didn't require staffs. As a matter of fact, they might have been in the way. Or Colin Powell, it was amazing to see the two of them. Matter of fact, they would argue about who was going to get on the phone first, because they both had such respect for each other. The current chairman is supposed to get on the phone last. And I'd have both of them on the phone, and it would be hilarious. I'd say, gentlemen, you are connected. It was just hilarious.
But it's amazing that, people get to that level of leadership and still maintain their humility, right? Still maintain they're so grounded, right?
It's how you know they're the best. In all honesty, the ones that tell you the least about themselves, or that have the least need for hoopla, are probably the ones that you want to follow the fastest.
Exactly. That's fascinating. Well, you had some great experiences.
Absolutely.
Along the way, obviously there's an element of leadership about public speaking. So it's one thing to be in meetings, but the other thing is to be a public speaker. Were you always comfortable speaking in public?
Oh God, no. Matter of fact, if Bill was here, he would be laughing out loud. I'm a young, just selected for major. I don't think I'd pinned on. And I did a retirement ceremony. And then soon after that, I did a speech, and I was abysmal. And I had a boss, Bill Jones. General Jones was one of the greatest mentors of all time in strategically and tactically. And this was tactical guidance. This is a guy that, every time I would do anything or bring him anything, he'd put his head in his hand and he'd say, Vautrinot, have I taught you nothing? Was the start of every conversation. Vautrinot, have I taught you nothing? And about speaking, he said, okay, Vautrinot, that was a C-. You need to get rid of the notes. You already know what you're going to talk about. You've got it down cold. Get rid of the props, and stop worrying about what you're doing to speak. Worry about what other people need to hear and how you communicate. You've got the
great advice.
And then, really tactical, your voice is too high and too fast. What I want you to be is lower and slower. And here's how you're going to do it. Every day that you're going to have some kind of a speaking thing, on your way into work, turn on the radio, listen to the commentator, and repeat everything they say at the pace they say it, to slow yourself down. And just before you get up, lower your voice an octave, because women's voices by nature are higher. They're harder to hear. Just for the human ear, they're harder to hear. Lower and slower. And I took all of those to heart and never looked back. Much later, when I learned to write a good speech,
right,
but to be able to give one, that was Bill Jones. Boy,
you're lucky you had somebody like that to give you, sort of chapter and verse on how to do it, right?
And with no rancor, you've got a girly girl voice. It was just lower and lower.
I think he's spot on too about the notes. He was spot on about the notes. I hate using notes, just because it distracts me.
Yeah, and I don't use a podium either. I don't use a podium. You can't see. My height, but the podcast can't see it. I'm short. When I stand behind a podium, I look like Kilroy hanging on. It's ridiculous. So I'd rather have a mic, even a mic with a tail or a lavalier, and just walk the stage. And when I practice on a treadmill. I practice talking to the pace. And what I find is the walking helps remind me of everything, and it keeps me at a pace that is slower.
Awesome. So you still remember those lessons from way back when?
They're ingrained, and I give them to other people because they've been good to me. So
you've had obviously a lot of successes in the Air Force, but we've all made mistakes. Can you think of a time that you made a mistake, whether tactically or strategically, doesn't matter, I guess, and what you learned from it, what you took out of it, and that made you a better leader?
Yeah, let's start with the tactical ones. That the list is long. It's only an hour podcast, right? So we'll just take a couple of examples. I have lots of mistakes. When I ran this Space Operations Center at Vandenberg, and this is as we had gone, 9/11, going into Afghanistan, all of those kinds of things, and we had messed up the maintenance on satellite systems and when some things were going to be available. The details don't matter, but my part, I was also the director of operations, so we screwed up. And I get called into my boss's office, and he's been called by U.S. Space Command. I mean, this has gone up the level. And I get called in, and he said, "Dan, what in the hell happened?" And I looked at General Looney and I said, "Sir, we screwed up. Here's how. It won't happen again. Here's what we're doing to fix it. We just screwed up." And he said, "Well, okay, if you're on it, then I don't need to be on it. Don't screw it up again." And I learned really early on, remember back to that, 5 important things you can say. And the most important is no excuse, sir. When you screw up, no excuse, sir. You just fix it. It's nobody else's fault. Yeah, there's probably a series of things that led to it. Nobody needs to know how you built the watch. They just need to know that it's wrong and that you have a way to fix it. And just a terrific lesson. Much later, working with some of the people in your old business, this is when I'm a general officer and I'm at network warfare, strategic failure. We had an opportunity to go after a terrorist, known and everything else. And we had the opportunity, we had the means, we had the plan. And so we get into the meeting to discuss how we're going to do this. And I missed completely that the organization that was going to get in the way of this happening, your former organization, didn't want it done. Not because it wasn't a great plan, not because we weren't right about all these other things. They had a completely different agenda and a reason for wanting to do something that was not part of our calculus and the strength to prevent it from happening. And you talk about a failure in not reading the room and not working through a better way to do it with somebody that had a completely different agenda and understanding that there were different agendas. That same person was responsible for taking out a whole bunch of people about a year and a half later. You're here. I will never forget that if I had done that strategically better, that person wouldn't have been there and we wouldn't have lost some folks. And so on both sides, owning it, back to, Bill Jones used to say, best idea in the world at the wrong time is not the best idea. You gotta,
I like that.
You gotta wait for timing. Heck, when we created US Cyber Command, timing was everything. And strategically, I had to timing and understanding other agendas, even if it wasn't part of my mission plan or my agenda. If you don't understand it, you can't get yours through.
Yeah. No, beautiful. I love both examples. And then the first example being, actually the power of forgiveness to a certain extent, and with the confidence in knowing that you knew what you were doing, you stepped in it, and you're going to move on. And the second one to me is like, it's really touches on emotional intelligence and understanding. Not reading the room or whatever, but realizing that hopefully as you move forward, that will not replicate itself again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you just, and especially when it's organizations you haven't worked a lot with before, or people you haven't worked a lot with before, you don't have a trust relationship. You just, my mother will tell you, I'm a bulldozer. I roll steam, and I'm happy to vector in any direction. I used to tell my folks that I'm as a steamroller, I'm going to roll steam. Vector me wherever you like. I have to let people vector me. Because you'll get moving too fast. And first of all, you don't want to leave people behind, but also you'll create antibodies that you don't need to create. Yeah.
In all fairness too, my former organization is as wonderful as I think it is. We had a certain amount of people, maybe a fair amount of people, that always thought that we were better than anybody else, and we didn't want to share. We didn't want to talk. And that happens in any organization, I think, at some point.
I think that's absolutely true. And there's misconceptions about different organizations. what you think they're going to do and what you think they care about. And then there's other organizations you learn about and just say, oh my God, had I known. Your Department of Treasury, when I ran the Joint Interagency Task Force for Cyber when we were doing offensive operations. Loved the Department of Treasury. And the reason was, particularly OFAC, because most people don't realize, the reason that Kuwait loves us is not because we sent military in, it's because we moved all the money so Saddam Hussein couldn't get it. And that was Department of Treasury. They protected all of the wealth of the country so that we had that timeline, and then they gave it all back to the country. But at any rate, when we were doing operations, whoever had the authority was the lead, wore the hat, and everyone else was a supporting agency. So we would do all the plans and all the targeting analysis and everything else. With Department of Treasury, unlike the FBI or law enforcement, where it's beyond reasonable doubt, Department of Treasury is preponderance of evidence. It's the 50.0001%. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, if it's in the financial stuff, the stuff that they could do or you could do to support them was just fabulous. And I would never have known that had I worked directly with them in mission operations. Just a fantastic organization.
Yeah. I mean, I always got a lot out of interagency liaison relationships. Again, another learning experience as you talked about.
Yeah.
So when did you what command were you in? Oh, sorry. What command were you in when you became a general officer? And did you always aspire to wear the stars on the shoulder?
So I always thought my career would be over long before that. Particularly when you become a group commander and a wing commander, and you have 1,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 people that work for you, and a good portion of them are 18 to 21-year-olds living in the dorms. I always thought that one of them would underage drink and jump off a balcony and your career's over. As in the military, I think the term is we've lost faith in your ability to command. It might be completely out of your control, like, 2 Navy ship drivers. One of them is absolutely at fault. The other one is the poor sod that got ran into, but they're both fired.
Right.
I always figured that was going to happen long before. And frankly, it's very freeing to realize that, you know what, your career hangs in the balance of an 18 to 21-year-old's good or bad decisions. Do the best you can do and move on. So coming out of wing command, I was selected for general officer and was assigned to the Pentagon and pinned on. And then so technically I was a 1-star when I was at the Pentagon, and I was in the organization, was the office symbol was XOS. At the time, XO meant operations, the G3 or the A3 now, but XO was operations. XOS, I called it other stuff. If it wasn't fighters, bombers, or tankers in the Air Force, it belonged to XOS. So all the force protection, all the space, all the cyber, all the nuclear, everything that wasn't fighters, bombers, and tankers was part of XOS. And so great learning experience for all the different mission areas. But at any rate, that's when I pinned on 1-star and then went out. Believe it or not, my next assignment was running recruiting service for the Air Force.
Oh, okay.
Who knew? I didn't even know what it was. The 4-star boss said, Suzanne, have they told you what you're going to do next? No, sir. Well, you're going to be running recruiting service. Oh, well, thank you, sir. I had to go back and look where it was. And what I realized was, oh, okay, I'm going to go work for General Looney again. He was the 4-star in charge of Air Education Training Command. This was one of the commands that fell under him. So, okay, I get it. I'm going to go work for Toons Looney is what they called him, but I'm going to go work for him again is what was really going to happen. But okay, got it.
Toons Looney. That's funny. Yeah, but I was in recruitment for a little bit in the agency too, and it was just kind of out of the. I mean, I kind of I was asked to be in it, sort of like you, but I found it to be even. I was not an operator for a better part of a year, but I learned a heck of a lot that helped me later on in life. So.
Oh, me too. Recruiting service is a business. Make no mistake, it's a business. And I had a huge budget cut and a huge personnel cut. We're talking 30 and 50%. And you had to figure out a completely new way to run it. And so I gathered all, and largely run by chief master sergeants. And so you gather them all together. And it was funny. I can remember saying, okay, can we close recruiting sites? And oh no, ma'am, can't do that. So you don't have enough money, you don't have enough people, and you can't close sites. And we had sites that we called it rolling donuts. Say that a recruiting site in Berkeley, California is probably not going to get a lot of traffic.
Right.
And
just saying.
Miami where nobody's qualified. It's just
right.
It is what it is. So, fast forward and I realized, okay, I can't move that needle. I said, okay, so who mans our recruiting sites? Oh, well, ma'am, you do. I said, okay. And who decides who I'm going to send to those sites? Oh, ma'am, you do. Okay, well, I'm deciding that I'm not sending people to any of these sites because we don't have enough people.
Mm-hmm.
Can I do that? Well, yes, ma'am, you can. Okay, so I simply didn't man them. Then we called the office in the Secretary of Defense's office, which is a 6-letter office, which means 6 levels down from anybody that's important.
Okay.
It said, hey, not for nothing, but I'm unable to man this recruiting office. If you would like the space for one of our other wonderful sister services, please feel free. Don't want it to go to waste. And they said, well, thank you. And they called back in a couple of weeks and said, hey, since you're not using as much square footage, we're going to give you this much money to refurbish the other places that you've got. Never asked a bit of permission to close anything, to not man things. We just did it. And we made all of our recruiting goals and stuff. We didn't say anything at the time. If you go back, I testified to Congress. I never said are no longer manning recruiting offices everywhere in the country.
Correct.
Because why would you? I did learn that whole thing about don't poke the bear, but at the same time, I learned a ton at marketing, everything. It puts me in good stead now in my second life.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
In your career, because I know this is for a lot of people coming out of USG going into the private sector, at least in my day, it was harder to fire, right? And a lot of times they didn't fire, they just kind of moved people along, even though they should have let them go. They didn't want to, they just move it along. But, it's something that you end up having to do, especially in the private sector. Do you remember the first time you had to let somebody go and how it felt, or demote?
Oh, yeah. I could remember the ones that were tough and the ones that were easy.
Right.
Somebody that just, even as a young commander, bringing somebody in to say that you're not going to recommend them for promotion or you're going to remove them from the job that they're in, not because they're not a good person, but this is just not something they're great at. And you want to help them find something that they'll be great at and where they can succeed. And so that's the conversation you have. And those ones are incredibly emotional and tough because the person you're talking to is a good person.
Yeah.
But you got to let them go. And because it makes the organization stronger. If it takes 2 people to do somebody's job, then there's a lot of job not getting done. And I always thought that would be tough, but I actually did a talk with all of my young folks when I was a wing commander. And I talked about contribution and that it used to be, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So we need to make sure our weakest link is strong. And I said, that's garbage. That's not the word I used, but I said it was garbage, that we were too small to be carrying the weakest link. Look on either side of you. And if you're not looking at the weakest link, you may be the weakest link. And we need to get rid of those folks because we don't have enough time to bring those along. We were at war. And I would have thought that I got some pushback because it wasn't our DNA to have a conversation. I got exactly the opposite. It was a thank God, because we don't want to have to carry the folks that aren't carrying themselves.
Right.
So even in the military, that was the case. When somebody does something wrong, and I had a young person that not only had he screwed up beyond belief, but lied about it, very high level of clearance, not reporting things. I mean, it was just egregious. And this kid comes into my office, and I always did, when you did, these kinds of things, you'd have the Uniform Code of Military Justice, kaboom, as a book in front of you, and you'd have their senior leadership person, and then you'd have maybe your lawyer, but whoever. And this kid didn't get it. And so I got up and I ripped, you have the Velcro patches. I ripped the patches off and said he wasn't worthy to be part of my unit. And I ripped the Air Force patch off and said, and you're not worthy to be in my Air Force, and you're not worthy to wear this rank. Just ripped him off. And,
wow.
and not only did he get it, but the story got around. And I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because this kid didn't get it. That what he had done is put people in jeopardy and everything else, and didn't belong in my Air Force. Nothing easier in my life than getting rid of somebody that was jeopardizing my folks and jeopardizing the mission. Or, it'd be like at CSX, if somebody's jeopardizing rail safety and you're going to lose an engineer or lose a conductor or anybody, you want them gone. And so I find that when it's that case, it's really easy. When it's a good person, it's a longer conversation and you just want to help them find something that they will be good at.
Yeah, it's much harder. So much harder.
Yeah.
But leadership, that's kind of, there are a lot of, I think it's always better to be in a leadership position. I've been individual contributor once in my agency career, and I didn't like it because I was working for a leader that nice guy, ineffectual, and I couldn't make any changes because I was an individual contributor, right? So I always think leadership is the way to go, but there are also some negatives or just hard things you have to do. Leadership is hard, but it's also rewarding, I think.
Yeah. You kind of get, you get to where there's no emotion in it. It's unemotional in the sense that your job is to do the mission.
Right.
Your job is to lead your team. And if that's what it takes, then that's what you do. Your job isn't to make everybody happy.
Exactly.
It's
Amen
not
to that.
You can make those work together, but being everybody's friend is not your job.
Right. So speaking about emotions, you are, you're, ostensibly at the height of your career. What led you into the private sector? What led you to decide, okay, this phase of my professional life is over and I'm moving on to this other phase?
You get some help with that. As you know, you serve at the pleasure. And so I had two things going on. I'm in a career field that wasn't core competency for my service. And so it wasn't going to be burgeoning. And I had just recovered and was on my third, or about to be on my third, medical review board for cancer. If you can't deploy, you can't command. So you can do staff jobs. Wouldn't that be fun? So
no.
So simultaneously, they didn't need me, and I couldn't do the things that I love and care about. So when Bill and I were approved to retire, I kid you not, we got the note and we danced in our dining room in San Antonio to a song, Big Head Todd and the Monsters, Bittersweet, Bitter. I remember the song because it was playing. Bill and I are dancing in our dining room.
Awesome.
Because we're about to be, free. So but it's a decision on both sides. You do something at the pleasure, and if they had needed me to do something, there's an obligation to do that. That's part of what you sign up for as a general officer. But at the same time, when it's time, it's time. It's always that little bit of trepidation about what's next. And honest to God, I knew what I didn't want to do next. I had no idea what I did want to do. We were going to take 60 days and see the country, which we did do. But by the end of that 60 days, I was already on my first board. And so it was just surreal. Oh, wow. One of those things where you just can't make this up. Like I said, when I grow up, I want to be me. I have been so incredibly fortunate.
Yeah, you've been blessed. So how did they reach out to you to be on this board?
Yeah. All boards reach out to you. It's not like they publish. It was a very strange call. I was towards the end of my time. I knew I was retiring. Matter of fact, somebody else knew I was retiring, and they had put my name forward. The company was looking for somebody that had technology, cyber, government. They didn't care if it was military, but understood how government worked. But a whole list of things. Plus, senior leadership is table stakes. And so as a general officer, you're C-suite or CEO equivalent. So at any rate, I get this call from a executive search. I didn't know what executive search was. My exec comes in and says, "Ma'am, there's somebody from executive search that wants to talk to you." What the hell that is. So I went and talked to my lawyer. So I said, "Yes, ma'am, you are, because you're not talking to a company. This is somebody that's going to be representing a company or a bunch of companies and is looking for." So, oh, okay. So I met this person. The only way I could meet with them is, because of what my schedule was and theirs. I was on a business trip to Maryland, and we met. I took a train to Philly. They took a train from New York to Philly. here we are in the train station for 2.5, 3 hours. I get back on a train and go back to finish up the meetings in Maryland and then go home. And it wasn't that I was being vetted.
Ah, okay.
Since in the military, you don't have executive search. You don't really understand that, but I was being vetted. So fast forward, I get an invitation to meet with other board members that would like to consider me for a potential position. They wanted to meet with me the day after I retired. I kid you not, the day after. My whole family is there. You're trying to clean up your entire command.
Right.
My comment was, I will not be at my best. Let's delay this. Oh no, there's 3 board members in the same place. They're all going to meet with you. This never happens. You have to go. 6 o'clock the morning after I retired, I'm in New York City doing 2 days of interviews. And all of them were fabulous. They weren't like any job interview. It was like meeting your family and friends, and they just wanted to know your story. And so I think this is a lark, and I've had a good experience, and I fly back, and Bill and I get ready to go on our drive for 2 months in the Navigator, and it's going to be great. And I get a call. Hey, Zan, they really enjoyed meeting you. They'd like to see you in California. And I said, well, that's great, because we're in the car. I'll be there on the 9th of July. It'll be awesome. Pause. Yeah, no, they'd like you there day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking 2 things. The first is that's the 3rd of July, right before the holiday. That's when they want, okay. And that's going to be a really expensive plane ticket. You remember, I'm in the military,
Right.
They don't care. Can you be okay? So Bill drives the first part of the drive without me. I go to the meetings in California and fly back and hook up with him in Las Vegas for the 4th of July. And then we continue on our journey. And then a couple of weeks later, I get called back again. It was just the strangest thing.
Jeez.
Just, okay.
And it worked out. And how many boards are you on now?
4 public, 1 private, 1 nonprofit. My nonprofit is City of Hope. Obviously, wonderful cancer research. So let me do a shout out for TGen, which is the genetic engineering facility that's in Phoenix, which is part of City of Hope. And City of Hope, just tremendous cancer research and clinicals, and they're doing God's work.
God bless you that you survived your own cancer.
Same to Janice.
Thank you.
We had that conversation. What I found is the number of people that have been through this is extraordinary. And if not cancer, then heart or everybody's got something. And so we all just power through, and been really fortunate.
Yep.
Yeah. Bill says he didn't need a marriage license. I have 2 fake knees, missing cheek parts, an implant in the left eye, and cancer. He said he didn't need a marriage license. He needed an extended warranty.
But as you said, when you were, young in the Air Force Academy, you just keep pushing forward, right?
Yep.
Beats the alternative. Pushing forward. Exactly. And you have your own company too, your own consulting firm, correct?
Yes, Kilovolt Consulting. This is hilarious. When we were getting married, we were later in life. We were both in our late 30s. And my mother hit him up on the dance floor at the wedding and asked him if I was good. She didn't ask me. She asked him if I was going to change my name. And Bill, being the guy that said, well, yeah, we thought we'd do a shortened version of a hyphenated. We thought we'd put Keller and Vautrinot together and get Kilovolt. What do you think? My mother is apoplectic at this point. She doesn't realize he's just kidding.
He's kidding,
so,
yeah.
Years later, when we created the consulting firm, as I retired, you have to have an entity to do the consulting. And we get to the lawyer's office and he says, what do you want to call it? And we both looked at each other and said, Kilovolt.
Amazing. I love it. It
was just great. But I do less and less of at the beginning, when it was only 1 board and then 2, I did a lot more of the senior advisory consulting, those kinds of things. With the boards, there's really not much time. So I'm pretty limited. I senior advisory with Oliver Wyman and some other things that I do for very small companies, but much less than I used to.
Right. Well, you've had and continue to have a full life. When you peel everything back, what?
You have to fill it up with what you like best.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%. As you look back on everything and all your experiences and all the things you've learned and all that you've given to the country, to the military, and now in the private sector, if you were to talk to someone starting out their career and they aspire to be a leader, what would you tell them? I mean,
the first thing is find things that do light you up in the morning. You will
mm-hmm.
be better at them. You will work harder at them if you love them. I told you I was a Malcolm Gladwell fan, and he talks about the 10,000 hours. You are
Yes.
do 10,000 hours at anything you don't love. That's how you get good at it, is because you love it, and therefore you spend all the time doing it. So that's kind of your foundation. But don't limit your foundation. I am absolutely convinced that everything that's come to me in life is because of breadth and not depth.
Mm-hmm.
I was willing to try new things. The number of times I got told, "Oh God, Dan, your career's over if you do that." All evidence to the contrary.
Right.
Try new things. If you're doing the same thing you've done before, you're backing up. And so that breadth and that willingness to try new things and truly try them. Not, I don't mean, waft in and have somebody else do it and say you were in charge, which we've all seen.
Mm-hmm.
I do it, dive in, all in, learn it, get good at it, and then be willing to try other new things. And it really is a wonderful life.
I love that, because people have to be willing to take a risk. But again, if you love what you do, and I think you and I and Bill, for instance, and Frosty and Lance, we've
yeah,
Janice, we love what we did in life, and we found ourselves in careers that really turned us on. There were ups and downs, like there is in life. But when you look at the totality, like you and I will look back and say, I did what I wanted to do, made the contributions, I had great times, and got through the bad times, and we're still kicking, right?
Absolutely. And a bad day is not the same thing as a bad job or a bad option.
Right.
You just work through it, or even a bad month. There's some tough times. Sometimes the fact that you had to work through it and find a solution makes it enjoyable. There's something to be said for the win at the end when it's a really hard fought fight.
Yeah. If it's too easy, anybody could do it, right?
Yeah. And you really don't enjoy the win as much.
Well, first of all, I could go on and on. I think I find your career and your background and your leadership style, just fascinating. And I think, I just really admire you as a person and as a leader. I have from the first time we met you, and you've got a good heart too, which I think is important for a leader. And so I really appreciate you taking, especially, I know how busy you are, taking the time to do this for us. That means a lot.
It's an absolute pleasure. And hopefully there's something that resonated with the folks that listen to your podcast. I know that you have so much to offer. So thanks for letting me spend just a little bit of the time that you have important things to just share a little bit of a journey. It's like those jugglers, don't try this at home.
Right.
I got one of those kind of careers, but it's been a joy.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. And well, that's it for this edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. I know you're going to take a lot out of this podcast and the interview we had with Suzanne, and all of her experiences and lessons learned, and how we're continuing to move forward every single day, no matter what obstacle hits us. So continue to hit the like button, subscribe, please share the podcast with those, friends, family, even enemies. I think even enemies could learn a little bit about leadership. So until next time, what'd you say?
Don't tell them the good lessons.
Oh yeah, we'll just tell them the bad lessons. Oops. But anyway, till next time, this is it for the Ronin Leadership Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.